It's Lucy Lich, and this is Tiny House Conversations. It's the Australian-based podcast where I interview experienced tiny houses, tiny builders, and adventurers in the tiny world so you can discover how to create, build, and transition into tiny life. Before we get into the show, I'd love to know, is there a particular topic you'd like to learn more about, or a guest in the tiny house world that you'd love me to get on the podcast? Maybe you know of a tiny houser with an interesting story, or a tiny builder who builds amazing tiny homes and offers a professional, ethical, and reliable service. Or maybe you know of other experts or adventurers in the tiny house space who have a message that needs to be heard. Whatever the case, I'd love to hear from you, and you can head over to tinyhouseconversations.com/request. If you enter your guest or topic request there, I'll do what I can to make it happen for you. Thanks so much. Now let's intro today's episode. Hey, it's Lucy, and welcome back to another episode of Tiny House Conversations. Today is a solo cast, and it's also a very special episode because this is the first podcast I'm recording from my tiny home. And in this episode, I'll be sharing with you my stories about how I found a parking space for my tiny, including how I actually found 2 parking spaces, but the first one didn't work out, as well as all about my current parking space. I'll also be sharing with you some of the different things I did to prepare for the arrival of my tiny at its parking spot, as well as some of the different methods that I used, as well as I know that other people use to find a parking space for their tiny. And one of the most common questions that I hear about talking to different people in the tiny space is, okay, I want to live in a tiny house, but where am I going to park it? So we'll be covering off some of those things today. But I will say, if you haven't listened to episode number 12 with Bryony Jenkinson from Park My Tiny House, I really recommend checking that episode out. And I'll share a little bit more about what she does in this episode later, because she was one of the people that really helped me to find where I am now. Now, at the time of recording, I haven't actually officially moved into the tiny yet. So I'm slowly moving my stuff in, and I'm getting the last bits and pieces set up. So the solar system, the solar trailer is set up. I've got electricity, I've got internet, and the last thing to do is the plumbing stuff, the grey water and the rainwater tank. And yeah, we're not far off. So it's very exciting. And I just want to describe my view right now because I'm obsessed with it at the moment. So right now I'm standing at my mountain ash timber bench top, also doubles or triples as a workspace and a dining table. And I'm looking out the view of the kitchen window, and across the pond is the neighbour's dam. There's trees everywhere. The land is so beautiful. There's grass-fed cows on the land. The sun is shining, and I can't believe that I get to be here and work here, and I'm just so grateful. So I will share some videos and photos on my social media pages if you want to have a look at what that view looks like. So make sure you go and check me out at Tiny House Conversations on Instagram and on Facebook. So let's start with some of the different ways that I know people use to find a parking space, and some of the different ways that I use. So the first thing that I did was I was already in a bunch of different tiny house Facebook groups, and there's always people posting about trying to find a parking space in particular areas around the country. And so that's one of the first things that I did. So I posted in, I think it was the Land and Tiny Houses to Rent Facebook group. I put a link to that in the show notes. I also made a post on my personal Facebook page, just to share with, my Facebook friends if they knew anyone that had a spare piece of land. And then the other thing that I did was a really good friend of mine who is a yoga teacher as well, and she's done my website and she's helped me with graphic design stuff for many years now, even before the podcast. And I asked her to help me create a postcard or a flyer to go and do some letterbox drops in the areas that I wanted to potentially live in. And so what was interesting about that was we kind of she hadn't created it yet, but I got all the text together, and we looked into how much it was going to cost, and getting the wording right. And so I guess actually what I might share with you is just some of the things that I included on that flyer, even though we didn't end up getting it printed, because interestingly enough, once we were about to go into the creation process, I ended up finding a space. But first I'll share with you just some of the things I included on this flyer. Or we were actually going to do it as a postcard, sort of maybe something a little bit different and a little bit more casual and inviting. So I just introduced myself and, who I am, what I'm interested in. I talked about how I have the Tiny House podcast and how I'm looking for land to rent for my tiny house. And one of the things that I recognized was really important to include first, and this might come from, a lot of my business training, is to, let the person that you're contacting know what's in it for them. Because, okay, you want to find a parking space for your tiny house, but what do they get out of it? You want to kind of have this situation of painting the picture of, how it can benefit them, and obviously how it can be a mutually beneficial situation and agreement. So basically letting them know if it was something like a financial exchange, work in lieu, or a combination of both. And then I also mentioned just some of the things that I'm interested in or have experience in that could be relevant when it comes to work in lieu. So whether it's, having an interest in regenerative agriculture, even if, for me, I'm a beginner and a newbie in the practical side of that, but I know a lot about it in terms of, when it comes to our food system and things like that. And so I mentioned stuff like that. I also talked about, wanting to be part of a community. And I think that, if you're someone that's got experience in gardening and permaculture and maybe looking after bees and all sorts of things, that could be potentially something that is relevant or transferable to offering your experience and skills in exchange for rent, then that's something really good to put on the flyer that you're creating. Other things could even be looking after pets, feeding animals, even looking after children, if that's something that you're open to or that you have interest in or experience in. I then also put a section about just a bit more about my tiny house. So the specs of it, like the length of it and the width, and it was done by a professional building company that, works to spec on the caravan dimensions, and that the plumbing and electrical work and all of that and the gas work is done by professionals. And then I also just put a bit more about me. So just the kind of person that I am and how I tend to live, that I'm reliable, considerate, I'm sociable, friendly, I enjoy my own space, and I would be respectful of other people's space too. And then some of my passions and interests besides tiny homes, like sustainable living, yoga, meditation, being outdoors, stand-up paddleboarding, sound healing. No, so things like that. I think it's nice to kind of put a bit of personal touch in it, because these are the kinds of things that will let people get a feel for maybe who you are, and also points of interest that you might be able to connect on. And then the last part that I did was just put exactly what I'm looking for. So the dates that my tiny house was potentially going to arrive, some of the different areas that I was looking at, and then I also included, what I would need access to in terms of resources. So whether it was mains electricity, water, sewage, or if it was going to be off grid, or the potential plans of what I might need now versus what I'm working towards down the track. As well as like mobile phone access, and then letting them know that I have a composting toilet, because, some people are friendly towards that and know all about it, and others might not know as much or might not be as friendly. I think often many properties will have a septic system on rural properties. Not all of them do that, but a lot of them will. And so that might be the way that they do things, and so maybe don't even really know how things would work with composting toilets. So I think it's really good to say all that up front, as well as what you're planning to do with the grey water. And then what I also did was I made it really clear that I only use natural personal care and cleaning products, so that no chemicals would come in contact with the land through the grey water and all of that. I think that's something that is particularly important to a lot of people. And then just kind of finishing off with, letting them know how they can contact me and, inviting them to get in touch if this is something that they wanted to know more about. So as I mentioned before, I didn't actually have to end up going to print them and go around and letterbox drop, because in the meantime, I mentioned before that I did a Facebook post on my personal page, and one of my Facebook friends who, it's so interesting to think about when we talk about Facebook friends that are maybe not necessarily, close friends or people that you see regularly, or even people that you have met, many times before. So there was this one lady that I became Facebook friends with her because she attended one of my workshops when I did a yoga and sound healing workshop probably 3 or 4 years ago down the south coast of New South Wales, near the area that I wanted to live in, that I've moved to now. And I used to play the Native American flute, and she was starting to learn when she came to my workshop, and she really loved it and connected with the flute. And we connected on the flute, and we ended up just becoming friends on Facebook. And so, weren't in touch or anything really very often. We might every now and then like comment on each other's posts or like exchange a message back and forth. And I just remember when I was in the process of looking for my tiny space that I saw a post of hers come up, and she talked about how she's starting to do her own sound healings. And I thought that's really cool, because I know that's something when I first met her that she was wanting to do and she was working towards. And so I thought I might just check in with her and send her a message and say, hey, it's really great to see that, you're doing your sound healings. And actually she did end up buying a flute from me a while ago too. So I asked her about how that was going, and then we just got to exchanging messages back and forth, and she was saying, how she was doing. She lives down in the south coast as well, not right near the area that I am. And she was asking about how I'm going and what I'm up to. And I told her about the tiny house, and she said, oh yeah, I saw your post. And I didn't even ask her, but she just said to me, I'll have a think and see if I know anyone, maybe I will. And I was like, oh, that'd be great. Thank you so much. And I, didn't think anything of it. And then the next day I got a message from her, and she goes, oh my God, I know this lady that has about 70 acres, and she has a lot of kangaroos on her property, and she's always looking for people to help on the land. And I think she's had some caravans or people with vans and stuff live there before. So if you want, like, I can connect you guys. And I thought, yeah, that would be amazing. And so she did that. And I ended up talking to the lady on the phone and organized in a few days after that to come down and see her and visit her on the land. And I got there, and it was just so, so beautiful. So 70 acres, right down the country road, really far away from everything, but also not far away. So probably only 20 minutes to the main road and then into town, for, if you needed to go shopping or anything like that. But that's ultimately what I want. Like, I love being or feeling like I'm sort of far away from everything and just out on the land, but then also having, access if I need to go out and get things, and it not to be too much of a headache, or if I need to go out and meet friends or go to yoga or whatever it might be. This was probably back in, I'd say, April or May of 2022, maybe a bit after that, but it was definitely like, it was either just before or just at the start of going through the design process of my tiny house. And so I'll just back up a moment here. So before I decided I was going to be moving down to the south coast of New South Wales, it was actually between down this way or up north in the Mullumbimby area around Byron. And I'm not sure if I shared this on the podcast before, but I was actually up in Mullumbimby around the first round of floods earlier this year. I think it was around the end of Feb or March or something like that. And I was visiting a friend who has 100 acres up there, her and her family, her husband and little boy, and that was going to be a potential parking space. I went up there to visit them and check out the land, and also it was her husband's birthday. But unfortunately got stuck there in the floods, and that became a sort of one of the factors of me going, do I really want to to park my tiny up there, especially when it was just chaos, and that wasn't even the first round. There were at least 3 rounds of flooding, maybe even more. I'm not sure. But that was a consideration because obviously many people lost their homes. There's also the factor of mold and actually a really big lesson that I learned from being up there and just seeing the aftermath of people losing their homes and where I was staying at my friend's place as well as an Airbnb, that we were fairly safe where we were. And one of the reasons was because we were up on a hill, right? And so we weren't able to get flooded in that way. And it made me go, okay, that's a really good thing to consider when it comes to finding a parking space for my tiny, is that you want to be in a place that, whether it's on a hill or in a spot where there's really good drainage so that, you can remove the possibility of being flooded in or severely minimize it, hopefully. And anyway, so it was between north or south, and I was torn for so long. And then at some point, I think I was going through the design process. It might have been a couple of weeks after we started the process, where I was actually down here on the South Coast. I spent a fair bit of time down here, and I've got friends down here and other things that I do down here several times a year. And something dropped in for me when I was down here the most recent time, and I thought, yeah, this feels right. This is where I want to be. For many reasons. Like, I would have loved to be up north too, but for many reasons, it didn't feel like the right time to be up there, and it just felt really right to be down here. So anyway, back to the story of visiting the 70 acres, the lady that had kangaroos, and having it be April or May of 2022. She actually had a caravan on her land, and she said, if you wanted to, maybe you could come and live in the caravan and sort of test things out and see if it's the right fit and, see how you go with it while you're waiting for your tiny to be built, so that you don't just move it here and then find out, oh, this is not the right place. And I thought that's a great idea, because I was already thinking of moving down here, moving my life out of Sydney anyway, before even looking for a parking space, but it was a matter of when, just so that I could be down here, so that it would be easier for me to not have to travel 4 hours one way and then back if I needed to come and either do letterbox drops or have a look at different places and all of that. So we ended up organising that, and I moved down to the south coast of New South Wales, near the Batemans Bay area, middle of July 2022, and I moved into the caravan, and it was so beautiful just being out there. It was so peaceful, felt really, really far away from things. And by day 2, it was day 2, I had this really strong feeling of, this is not the right place for me. And there were various reasons for that. One of the main things was because there were so many kangaroos around, I wanted to have gardens and have some bees and just do different things on the land. But because there were so many kangaroos around all the time, it wasn't the right environment to do that. Like, I wouldn't be able to do that the way that I wanted to. And so that was like a main factor. And there are a couple of other things which I won't mention, but I also knew that I had to get out of there quickly because my tiny was in the process of being built, and I started to get stressed. I was like, geez, where am I going to move now? Like, I didn't end up creating those flyers yet, so maybe I would have to revisit that option. But then I also remembered Bryony from Park My Tiny House, who connects landowners with spare space on their land to tiny houses who are looking for a parking space for their tiny home. I knew that she had recently been looking at different properties or looking for different hosts down in the South Coast, and that she'd actually had quite a few new listings down in the area that I was looking for. And I just remember looking on, because I also had a membership with her, but I didn't need to use it up until that point. And I remember looking in the members forum, and there was a place that was right near where I was actually staying already in the caravan, and it sounded right up my alley. So there were permaculture gardens, bees, chickens, all the things that I wanted to do. And I was like, just everything about it sounded amazing. It looked really amazing. And I remember getting in touch with Bryony and saying, what do you think about this place? And she said, oh, you would love this place. You would be a really great fit there because the owner is a yoga teacher as well. And it turns out that, and this is how funny the yoga teacher space is, a very small world. So it turns out that she knew one of my really good friends down here in Bateman's Bay, who's a yoga teacher and owns one of the studios down here. Bryony said, I'll get in contact with her and I'll put in a good word and we'll try and work this out. So in the meantime, I was like, okay, I need to get out of this place because I just need to get the ball rolling and move my stuff out. And there's no point in me staying here if I know that it's not for me. So luckily my mum's down in here in Bateman's Bay too. And so I went to hers, and then, Bryony helped me put in motion meeting this other landowner and having a chat on the phone. And, it just felt so right, so aligned, and just so everything that, I was looking for. And so ended up going to check out the land, and yeah, everything just started falling into place. And, being a yoga teacher, we connected on many different things, not just yoga, but just other aspects of life. And it just felt so, easy and effortless and open and supportive. And so, putting all the wheels in motion and sort of making it happen. I think it's been, several months now in the making of landing here where I am right now. And I couldn't be happier with where I'm at. So in terms of what the exchange is for parking my tiny house on the land, we're working that out, but it's likely to be that I'll be helping on the land. There might even be some financial exchange as well. It just depends on what we agree upon, and I've still got a little bit of time to do that. And I would say that, every single situation is different. Some people, the money is not necessary for them and they really need help on the land. Others want to have a form of additional income, and then others are happy to maybe do both. So I highly recommend, maybe just being, if you can, or whatever works, but suggesting all three options and seeing what works and what fits best for both. I'm super grateful to have found a host that is so supportive and helpful and generous. And, there's been back and forths and delays for various reasons. And she's been so accommodating and just so making, an effort to help me as much as possible, and being able to be on her beautiful land of 5 acres where there's a river at the bottom of the property, and it's just going to be a really great place to be able to live and experience life in a different way and really reconnect to being on the earth, not just going for a bushwalk every now and then, like actually living out there and being there and seeing what opens up for me in so many ways, internally, externally, and just being able to reduce my impact on the earth as well and live more consciously and mindfully, taking it, that self-responsibility to the next level. And, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. So that makes me really happy and looking forward to moving in completely and properly. So I highly recommend, if you're looking for a parking space for your tiny house in Australia, I do recommend checking out parkmytinyhouse.com.au, because there's new listings all the time, and Bryony really, she does her due diligence. It's not just connecting people, but it's, doing a lot of the background paperwork, and it's finding suitable matches, like I think she calls it Tinder for tiny parking or something like that, finding people that are going to really fit, on both sides. So now some of the things that I did to prepare for the arrival of the tiny was, and not everyone does this, but just from speaking to many different people on the podcast and offline too, it is good to be able to have the parking space leveled out. So we ended up getting an excavator in because the driveway needed some excavating too. So I ended up getting the parking space done at the same time and just really leveling out the land. I'm on clay here. And so the excavator created a tiny pad by leveling out the land and then adding some 20 mil aggregate rocks on top. And it looks amazing. And I know that when the Tiny got delivered by Mark and Hank at Tiny Towing, that they were pretty impressed by the Tiny pad because it made their job easier to be able to install the Tiny and get things set up. And then the other things that I also did was we got the same excavator to dig a trench for the cable conduit for the solar trailer, which was then installed probably last week now at the time of recording. And I also organised for gas bottles for my hot water system. So down here where I am, there's a rural store that does a gas bottle exchange. So that was super easy. That's all set up. I've also got the satellite internet set up now without wireless, which if you want to know more about that, you can listen to episode number 44 where I talk about the healthy features of my tiny house, as well as episode 32 with naturopath Amy Skilton on reducing electromagnetic fields or EMFs in your tiny house. And then the plumber has also come on site recently to have a look at the connecting to the existing rainwater tank, as well as what I'm going to do with grey water, and also finishing off the installation of the composting toilet and the ventilation and that kind of thing. So the last thing to do is the plumbing stuff. So that will mean that I'll be able to move in properly. And in a future episode, I'll share with you all about my tiny house expenses, so including the build, but also there's so many other costs involved, including getting tradespeople on site, including things that you're going to put inside your tiny. So I will do that in another episode. And I'll also say that if you're someone that knows that you want to go tiny and you're worried about not being able to find a parking space in the area that you're looking for, I would strongly recommend just trying all these different avenues. So you can get in the Facebook groups, you can do the letterbox drops. What ultimately worked for me was using the Park My Tiny House platform. But I also know that all these other avenues have worked for different people. And if you've listened to earlier episodes of the podcast too, I often ask many of the tiny house people that I've spoken to on the podcast, I've asked them how they found their parking space. So you can also hear, what has worked for different people. But mainly it's some people have found luck in Facebook groups, although I don't know if that's the most common one, but it could be for some people. I know people have done a lot of letterbox drops and have been really successful. There's also been people that have been introduced to friends or family member, as well as asking all the different people in your life. And I think it was in episode 24 with Marie Berenger. So she said to me, just annoy everyone in your life, and don't even worry about it. This is your life. So don't be afraid to ask as many people as you can, whether you put it on your social media pages, whether you call or get in contact with people, just put it out there, because you never know what could come back to you. And even though it sounds like it might be one of the hardest parts of this tiny house journey, from all the people that I've spoken to and from what I've observed and seen and heard about in the tiny house space, that it's always worked out one way or another. Because if you think about it, there's no shortage of land here in our beautiful country. And even if you don't know someone directly, chances are there's going to be other people that know people with a spare piece of land, especially during this time of, rising house prices, rising rent, inflation, all of that, and, this housing crisis. People with spare pieces of land are actually becoming more open and seeing how can I help in, what's my contribution during this housing crisis, and, where can I help out people with housing solutions? Because if you think about it, if someone that has a spare piece of land is able to provide parking space for whether it's one person, a family, a couple, whatever it might be, that then frees up, a rental property where, someone that maybe they're not looking for tiny house living, but they're just simply looking for a place to live. That frees up, a space for another family in need. So, it is this real knock-on effect, and there's a bigger picture here. And just know that you've got this, and, you just got to put yourself out there. You just got to take one step at a time. That's exactly how I approach this whole thing. Like, if I look back at my own tiny house journey from the time that I visited the first tiny house, I stepped in the first tiny house ever at the start of 2020 in Sydney in St. Ives, the Tiny House Festival in Sydney, up until now, where I'm literally standing in my tiny house recording this podcast, talking to you right now. I don't know if I ever thought, it would be possible, or it just seemed like, or maybe let's rephrase that. It just seemed like there were so many things to do, and it was overwhelming. But if I can leave you with one thing, and you can apply this to, I think, anything that you do in life, small steps, or tiny steps in this case, turn into big things. And so if you just take one tiny step after another, even if it, seems like this really overwhelming thing, and there's so many moving parts, and you don't even really know like where to start. This is why I do this podcast. This is why I speak to people week after week, and I get the best guests that I can to share these tiny house stories, and also these, experts in building tiny houses, as well as all the topics, composting toilets, off-grid solar systems, and so much more, tiny house regulations, tiny house parking. This is a resource for you to help you on your tiny journey. And all you got to do is just take one tiny step at a time, because if I can do it, you can do it. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find yourself looking out your window, sitting in your kitchen, sitting on your deck, having a cup of tea, looking out at the land and going, wow, look at all the steps that I took to get here, but I've actually done it. And now I'm living the way that I want to live. And I'm living life on my own terms. I'm feeling more free in many different ways. I get to be on the land. I get to be here with my family. Get to feel more peaceful inside. I get to create my life on my own terms. What's more beautiful than that? I get to open up a world of possibilities for myself and my family that I didn't know existed before. There's so many possibilities. So tiny things become big things, one step at a time. Now, if you have any questions about anything that I talked about today, or you have any feedback or comments, I always love to hear from you. You can come and say hi on Instagram or Facebook at Tiny House Conversations. You can also email me at tinyhouseconversations@gmail.com. Make sure you go check out parkmytinyhouse.com.au. I'll put all the links in the show notes at tinyhouseconversations.com. Thank you so much for being here, as always. Wherever you are on your tiny journey, this podcast is for you. Stay tuned every Thursday for new episodes of Tiny House Conversations, and I'll see you next time. Thanks again for listening. And if you enjoyed the conversation today, you found it valuable, and you want to support the podcast, the best way you can do that is to share the love. That way I can keep bringing you more tiny house conversations to help you on your own tiny journey. So here are 3 ways that you can support the podcast. Number 1, if you have a friend or family member that you feel would benefit from hearing these conversations, feel free to share it with them, email them, text them, send them a telegram, do whatever you need to do to share it with them. Number 2, if you hit the subscribe button, you'll know exactly when the next episode is live. And number 3, if you head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to podcasts and leave a 5-star rating and review. Thank you so much in advance. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next episode.